one, James, son of Zebedee. Similarly, in the book of James, it doesn't say, I saw Jesus. So, this argument that people try and put forth of, we solidly have these apostles who were eyewitnesses, and this is why they died. That argument just falls apart historically so quickly. It's terrible. So this is actually...
These two gentlemen here may think the Jesus Seminar are, pretty skeptical. They're the ones that, according to the red and pink letter marcation, reject up to 90% of the New Testament, so-called red letter words of Jesus. And yet when they get to volume 2 on the Acts of Jesus, the very skeptical group known as the Jesus Seminar, Paul's statement. Now, Paulogia is going to say here in a minute, Paul never says he saw the risen Jesus. False. False more than once. He says, last of all, he appeared to me. And he already said, 1 Corinthians 9:1, he uses a normal word for sight and says, am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus? Only sheer ignoring those passages can get to that conclusion. But back to the Jesus Seminar. There's the statement by Paul, I saw the risen Jesus. They judge it to be red. Red. Okay, now Mike said a moment ago, we don't have a description of Caesar's horse getting wet as he went across the river, but everybody believes he crossed the Rubicon, right? Okay, how about Peter? Peter's at the beginning of that list in 1 Corinthians 15, 3 and following. And it says, he appeared to Peter. You know what the Jesus Seminar colors that? Pink. Pink means probably. And they explain in a footnote, here's why we say probably. Peter doesn't say it. Paul cites the creed, but we still think it's accurate. So now on the Jesus Seminar, you have a red for Paul, a pink for Peter, and then they add, we think the women saw him too. All right, well, hey, we've got a mounting here of some evidence, and that's the early Christian creed. The women aren't there, but the early creed in 1 Corinthians 15 and following. And the Jesus Seminar rate 2 of the appearances red and pink, respectively. But they're just going to go, no, there's nothing here. Nobody says this.
The question, how might they, we're talking about the two, if we're talking about Peter and Paul, who are the best attested, Paul saw a vision. Everything that he says, if you look in Galatians, when he describes what happened to him, he was caught up in the third heaven. He didn't know whether it was real or not. He describes that himself. So Paul had a vision, and so that leaves sort of down to 1. So now we're down to Peter. So how can we explain Peter? Perhaps it's a post-bereavement hallucination, which are well documented. It happens to about 15% of the population. And it can even be multimodal. And so, it's not so hard. I understand that if you think that 500 people saw him, well, that's different. But all we have is a story that 500 people saw him.
If we're really stop there, he talks about the appearance to Paul being mentioned in Galatians, being caught up in the third heaven. That's 2 Corinthians. I believe it's chapter 4 at the very beginning. And that it's not likely at all. In fact, it's extremely improbable that Paul is referring to the appearance of Jesus that led to his conversion. And here's why. Most New Testament scholars agree that they take Paul's letters and then they take the book of Acts and they form a chronology from that. And most New Testament scholars who focus on this kind of an issue would say that Paul's conversion experience happened sometime between the early to mid 30s, okay? AD 30s, that is. And so now let's take 2 Corinthians. Most scholars will date 2 Corinthians between the years 55 and 58. Now let's state it in such a way that's going to be friendliest to what Paulogia is saying here. Okay, so we'll go with 55 here. 2 Corinthians 55. Now if you look at verse 2 of chapter 4 of 2 Corinthians, that's where Paul is mentioning being caught up into the third heaven. He says that 14 years ago, he was caught up in the third heaven. Now, if you take from 55 and subtract 14, you come up with the year 41. But Paul's conversion experience would have happened probably no later than the year 35. So it just doesn't work out that this would be the conversion experience that Paul is talking about. Paulogia is just
down to just 2 people.
He's not really looked at things here.
Who became.
Yeah. So, Dr. Gary, do you have anything to add on to that? What about the hallucinations? You know, they make this accusation about the hallucinations, and they say, well, you might have had 500 people, but only a book would have said that. You know, it just seems like they're going out there with a discount every little token, man. It's not giving any step, you know.
That's true. Now, he wasn't, in all fairness, he wasn't saying hallucinations about the resurrection. He was saying these may be post-death hallucinations that 15% of the people see. Okay, he's right about one thing. These are pretty well received events and described by medical persons. But right away, the case is prejudice. He says, well, when people see their loved ones after they bury the body that day, which is really common, and it's only a few seconds long, they're hallucinations. That's a really nice self-serving assumption. When some of these cases, you know, after people are buried, we have wakes in homes, right? That's tradition. We have wakes. We serve food. People come to the house. They're driven from long distances. Some of these post-death visions are seen by multiple people at one time. No, but Paulogia either doesn't know the data or he just wants to whisk it away by going, these are hallucinations, not giving it a chance of being the real thing. Oh, and he's probably going to say, oh, do you want to think they're real things? I'll tell you what. If I gave you some of the evidence for post-death visions, they're only less than seconds long, but these are written up in medical journals. If you want to see some of the data, you'd at least try to respond to it instead of whisking it away with the word hallucinations. It was just another shot that doesn't deal with the data. And again, back to Paul, where he said, we don't even know. Mike already referred to, he says, Paul said he saw Jesus in Galatians. Okay, and then he gives us reference from 2 Corinthians 12. And then he says, that's it. Total ignorance of 1 Corinthians 15:8 that the Jesus Seminar risks as a read, which means for sure, and totally ignoring 1 Corinthians 9:1, a normal word for sight. Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen the Lord? Look, we're either going to take data at face value, or we're going to ignore it and give the story we want. I see the second option over and over and over. And frankly, it bothers me because it takes advantage of people who don't know the data.
Yeah. And that's precisely, obviously, this is precisely what they're doing right now. They're totally taking advantage of this guy. This guy's clearly not aware of all the data that's out there. So let's see what else they have to say.
Believers, at least 5 years apart, they had separate experiences that they believed themselves were genuine. You know, then we're just talking about, and I think Matt would agree, that we don't deny experiences. People's experiences are their experiences. The problem comes when they attribute them to certain things, and we don't know if they're attributing them to the right thing or not. So the fact that we have two men in history who died attributing an experience to something, and frankly, we don't even know whether Paul just died politically or not. You know, the evidence is pretty slim here. Like, this is one of the weaker resurrection apologetics, I would say.
It's one of the, I don't know.
Well, that's the. So both of you guys are shaking your head. Go ahead, Dr. Gary.
It's Mike's turn, but if I could see something real quickly. I like the way we got from some evidence to no evidence, and it goes like this. We've got no evidence for Paul seeing anything. I'm going to ignore the two clear cases. I'm going to talk about one unclear case and get the book wrong, and then I'm going to say, voila, no story here. They're going to go to Peter. Well, it's not 1 Peter or 2 Peter. How about the creed of 1 Corinthians 15:3, which is affirmed by martyrdom? You know, almost every living critic, atheist New Testament scholars, Jewish New Testament scholars, they accept that first statement as being, Peter could be wrong, but it's a great case, they would say. And these guys go, yeah, nothing here, nothing here, nothing here. We've got nothing. Then here's the conclusion. What a flimsy case. Well, your case is flimsy. Why don't you play with the real data and you know, deal with the data instead of just giving your little opinions, which are totally ungrounded and wrong. He gets the book wrong. He gets the chapter wrong. He ignores the two passages on Paul. I'll tell you what, when I heard this for the first time, Marlon, I thought, I've had it. I mean, at least be fair with the data. You don't have to believe it, but be fair with it.
Yeah, yeah. Any add-ons to that, Dr. Mike Licona?
Not really. I mean, he does make a lot of simple, naive errors. And of course, you can expect some of these things from anyone. Now, I mean, I'm going to make them in the course of a live discussion. You're going to mix up some books or chapters or something like that, but he seems to be doing it constantly. So it's more than just a little hiccup here and there. It's a lot. It's happening a lot. And the death of Paul, I mean, Paul himself in his letters talk about how he was persecuted, even in what is it, where he talks about, I think it's 2 Corinthians. I think it's 2 Corinthians chapter 5, where he says, we as apostles die daily. Or maybe that's 1 Corinthians 15. We die daily. In other words, they're under the threat of death daily. They could be killed. And they went through all this sort of persecution. So the fact that they're willing to continue this, and Paul had a pretty good lifestyle by his own testimony. He's a Pharisee, he's growing up, and he was going up the chain of leadership within Judaism at that point, and he gives all that up to live a life of being persecuted harshly for his gospel proclamation. So, and then you've got later testimonies that he was martyred just outside of Rome by being beheaded. But even if you throw out those, you still have Paul's own testimony, corroborated by the book of Acts, that Paul endured great persecution for his gospel proclamation.